Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Clay Harmon buys a forgotten Oklahoma farm, he expects peace and restoration, not a war. But a mysterious HOA claims he owes $14,000 in fake fees, and they'll stop at nothing to collect. Forged documents, midnight threats, what they didn't expect, Clay fighting back. Hard. I bought the farm on a Tuesday. Not metaphorically, an actual 180-acre chunk of overgrown Oklahoma land with a sagging farmhouse, a crumbling red barn stamped 1911, and a pond that probably hadn't seen a fishing pole since Reagan was president. Most folks around here called it cursed, abandoned, or that damn eyesore past County Road 19. I called it potential. The place had been sitting for years, untouched except by vines and wind. I saw it listed in a tax lien sale, ran the title through my lawyer twice, and snatched it up for less than the cost of my company truck. My name's Clay Harmon. I'm 39 and I restore things. Old churches, turn-of-the-century hotels, train stations with holes in their ceilings, and history in their walls. My firm, Reclaim and Rise, has breathed life into buildings across 5 states. This time, I was doing it for myself. No clients. No deadlines, just me and the bones of a forgotten place. The first week was all sweat, mud, and splinters. I parked my camper near the old windmill and ran a generator for power. Chainsawed through a forest of saplings that had swallowed the fence line. Hauled out 3 refrigerators from the front porch and a rusted Ford hood from what used to be a tool shed. Neighbors didn't really stop by, though a few waved as they passed. One older guy at the gas station said, "That's brave, buying the Delman place." HOA tried to rope it in years ago, but old man Delman told him to shove it. At the time, I figured that was just small-town gossip. I was wrong. It was the morning of the 8th day when I found it. A white envelope in the rusted mailbox by the front gate. No postage, hand-delivered, gold-embossed logo in the top left corner that read, Cedar Grove Heritage Community. Sounded like a retirement brochure. I opened it standing right there in the dirt. Inside was a printed letter and a scanned invoice. The letter began, "Dear property owner," which already pissed me off. Then I kept reading. According to our records, your property, formerly under the care of Mr. Harold Delman, remains in non-compliance with the administrative standards outlined in the 2017 Expansion Protocol. The total amount due for unpaid assessments, penalties, and deferred maintenance fees is $14,480. Payment is required within 10 business days to avoid legal escalation. I blinked. Then I laughed, out loud, like a lunatic. I wasn't part of any HOA. My deed didn't mention one. Hell, the nearest neighbor was over a mile away, behind a cornfield and a screen of trees. This wasn't some manicured suburb. It was cow country that hadn't seen a lawnmower in a decade. Still, curiosity got the better of me. I sat in the camper that night with my laptop, Wi-Fi hotspot humming, and looked up Cedar Grove Heritage Community. Found a slick website full of stock photos, smiling couples in Adirondack chairs, brick houses with matching shutters, aerial drone shots of identical cul-de-sacs wrapped around an artificial lake. Looked like it was plucked from a catalog. Then I found the address of the HOA office. Turns out it wasn't far. Cedar Grove was a new development just 2 miles southeast of my land, where the county road curved past what used to be cornfields. I'd driven by their brick entrance sign on the way into town and barely noticed it, so the next morning I drove over. The HOA office turned out to be a repurposed realty trailer in a gravel lot near the front of the subdivision, tucked behind a dry fountain and a dying row of crepe myrtles. I parked, walked in, and was immediately met by a bored-looking receptionist tapping at a keyboard. "Name?" she asked. "Clay Harmon," I said. "I got a letter about some alleged debt." Her eyebrows lifted. "Oh, the Delman property. Miss, Brady wants to speak with you, Miss." "Brady? She's our president." One moment before I could protest, she picked up the phone and muttered something into it, then gestured toward a door marked private. "Choa, board only." Moments later, it opened. The woman who stepped out looked like someone who organized bake sales with military precision. Late 50s, bleach blonde bob, tailored blazer over a sleeveless blouse, and the type of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Harmon," she said. "Karen Brady." "Come in, let's clear up this little confusion. That was the moment I should have known." There would be nothing little about it. Karen Brady's office looked like a downsized courtroom, and a boutique insurance agency had a sterile little baby. Mahogany-looked desk, 2 leather chairs, shelves lined with binders labeled with things like architectural compliance and perimeter beautification mandates. There was even a small glass display case showing off mock-ups of the HOA's expansion plan. Little 3D printed houses in neat pastel rows. She gestured for me to sit, then took her place behind the desk and folded her hands like a judge about to hand down a sentence. "I understand this must be a surprise," she began, her voice syrupy but clipped. "But it's important you realize this isn't personal. It's procedural." I leaned back in the chair and crossed my arms. "You sent me a letter demanding $14,000 for something that has nothing to do with me. Seems pretty damn personal." She smiled without humor. "That amount reflects 8 years of unpaid assessments, interest, and penalties related to the Delman parcel, which, as of our 2017 jurisdictional expansion, falls within the projected governance area of Cedar Grove, Heritage Projected." "Governance?" I raised an eyebrow. "Lady, that land has been abandoned longer than your HOA has existed." She tapped a glossy binder, opened it with reverence, and pulled out a laminated map like it was the Ark of the Covenant. It was color-coded in pastel zones, green for parks, blue for water retention, and a suspiciously stretched pink outline labeled Annexed Future Residential Perimeter that looped over miles of rural nothing, including my property. "This map," she said, sliding it toward me, "was ratified by our board in May 2017. The Delman land was designated as a passive member parcel. As such, it accrued back assessments, even in the absence of residential development." I stared at her, blinking. "You're saying that because nobody lived there, and because you plan to maybe expand someday, you get to charge me for 8 years of fees?" "Not you personally," she said, tilting her head, "but any current owner assumes the obligations of the property." I laughed. "So if someone inherits a swamp and you've got it drawn on your clubhouse fantasy map, they owe you a decade of ghost rent?" Karen didn't flinch. "We are a legally recognized association with regulatory rights under the county's charter. The 2017 expansion protocol clearly establishes boundary prerogatives." "You mean the protocol that no one but you signed off on?" Her jaw tightened. She pulled out a folder labeled Delman. Inside were 2 pages, both marked Acknowledgement of Inclusion. Each had a shaky signature, supposedly from Harold Delman, and a date, September 2019. "See," she said, sliding them over. He agreed. "I didn't even pick them up. That man died in 2017. You might want to check your resurrection clause." For the first time, a crack appeared in her expression. Brief. Barely there, but I caught it. She collected the documents, smoothed them flat, and placed them back in the folder like I'd dirtied them with my breath. "If you dispute the validity of the inclusion documents, you are of course free to pursue arbitration. But until such time as this matter is resolved, the outstanding balance remains due, and further activity on the property, such as development or land alteration, may be considered in violation of HOA policy." I stood up. "You've got no jurisdiction, no legal footing, and no idea who you're messing with. I restore buildings older than your board members. I read charters in my sleep. And I'll be damned if I'm going to pay you a dime for land that doesn't belong to your spreadsheet." Karen stood too, smoothing her blazer. "Very well. But do remember, Mr. Harmon, we don't go away. We organize." I walked out of her office, past the receptionist who suddenly found her fingernails fascinating, past the fake fountain and the perfect shrubs, and into the blinding Oklahoma sun. I pulled out my phone, opened the county GIS database, and started digging. By the time I got back to my camper that night, I had half a dozen PDF overlays downloaded, county zoning, plat maps, HOA boundaries, and a deed history of the parcel dating back to 1963. I cracked a beer, opened my laptop, and began lining up timelines. The more I looked, the more obvious it became. Karen Brady had created her own personal fiefdom, and I had just become its heretic. By sunrise the next morning, I had diagrams, maps, and legal codes spread across the tiny table in my camper like I was preparing to defend Normandy. The Cedar Grove HOA expansion protocol was never recorded in the county plat registry. The boundary overlays confirmed what I already suspected. My land sat miles outside any legally recognized HOA jurisdiction. Karen's annexation was as real as a monopoly board, but I needed something definitive. I tracked down the contact info for Eric Delman, the son of the late Harold Delman, the previous owner of my farm. Found his name in a probate court notice from 2017, then cross-referenced it with a utilities record where he was listed as executor. Eric picked up on the second ring. "Is this about that damn property?" he asked before I even introduced myself. I chuckled. "It is. My name's Clay Harmon. I'm the new owner of the land your father left behind. I have a few questions, mainly about whether he ever signed anything with a homeowners association." Eric sighed. "Let me guess. Cedar Grove. Bingo." Jesus, they're still at it? I told him what I'd found, the invoice, the letter, the alleged inclusion agreement signed by his father in September 2019. Silence. "My dad died in June 2017, Eric said finally, buried next to my mom in Tulsa. He had 2 working fingers left, both from his right hand, and neither was steady enough to write a grocery list. No way in hell he signed anything." "I figured," I said, "but would you be willing to make a statement? Maybe even sign an affidavit confirming it?" "Gladly," he said. "I'll send you a notarized letter this afternoon." Hell, I've got a handwritten note from Dad in 2016 saying, "Tell that damn HOA to leave me be." Want that too? "Yes, please." By evening, I had everything scanned and saved: the notarized affidavit, the copy of Harold Delman's death certificate, and that glorious handwritten letter on a yellow legal pad with a coffee ring and a middle finger sketched next to the HOA's name. I bundled the files and emailed them to my attorney, Leanne Vickers, a former state land use prosecutor who now handled messy property disputes and developer fraud. We'd worked together on 2 courthouse restorations, and she was a bulldog. She called me 5 minutes later. "I haven't even finished the affidavit, and I already want to burn their office down," she said. "This isn't just civil overreach. If that signature is forged, and based on the date alone, it's clearly impossible. That's criminal fraud." "There's more," I told her. "Yesterday, 2 guys in a black Tahoe with HOA logos blocked my access road and tried to intimidate me into paying the debt. On camera. Said it was an official enforcement action." She went quiet for a second. "You still have the video?" "Of course I do." "Good. Save everything. I'll be at the county clerk's office first thing in the morning. In the meantime, send me copies of their letter, the map, the fake inclusion forms, and any footage you have of those guys threatening you." After the call, I sat in the camper staring at the screen. Somewhere between the old barn and the pruned-down live oaks, I was living in a damn land war with an HOA that thought Photoshop and bullying counted as jurisdiction. Just after midnight, I heard a vehicle slowing near the front gate. I killed the lights, grabbed my phone, and watched from the dark. Headlights flicked off. A shape stepped out and tossed something onto the dirt driveway, then sped off. I waited 10 minutes, then walked out with a flashlight. It was another envelope. No postage. Same HOA seal. This one said, "Final notice before lion action" in bold red type. I took a photo. Then I tore it in half and tossed it in the fire pit. Tomorrow, I was going nuclear. By morning, Leanne had already left me 3 voicemails and a barrage of emails. I hadn't even poured my coffee before she was calling again, this time from the steps of the county courthouse. "Clay," she said, "I've filed a formal criminal complaint. The county prosecutor's office is opening an investigation into Cedar Grove's practices, especially the forged documents. I also requested an emergency injunction to block any HOA attempts to file a lien on your property. And I want you to forward me that video of the 2 thugs in the Tahoe. Now." I didn't even ask how she'd moved so fast. Leanne in court mode was like a tornado in heels. I uploaded the footage. Clear as day, 2 men wearing HOA logoed polos blocking my access road. One of them stepping out, clipboard in hand, saying the words, "You either pay today or the debt gets escalated." We don't like escalation. The camera caught his face. The license plate. The smugness. Leanne messaged me 20 minutes later. Identified one of them. Real name, Trevor Mankins. He's listed as Compliance Enforcement Officer on the Cedar Grove HOA website. That's not a legal designation. It's just a fancy title for neighborhood goon. No legal authority whatsoever. I've added it to the complaint. While she built the case on her end, I went digging through the rest of the documents Karen had handed me. There was a scanned PDF titled 2022 Administrative Addendum, Unpaid Assessments. It listed 4 other rural properties, some as far as 3 miles from the Cedar Grove development, all marked as pending debt collection. One address stood out. A farmhouse off County Line Road that I remembered passing. peeling white paint, broken shutters, an elderly man sitting on a porch with an oxygen tank. I drove there. The man's name was James Holler, 81, widowed Navy vet. When I asked if he'd had any contact with Cedar Grove, he laughed bitterly. "They sent me a bill last year," he said. "Said I owed $6,000 for shared infrastructure maintenance. I told them to shove it. Then they started sending letters that looked like they were from the county. Even had a guy come to the door saying I was behind on HOA compliance fees. I called the sheriff. Did you pay anything? Hell no. But I've been worried they'll try to put a lien on the house. My wife died here. I'm not going anywhere." I thanked him, took down his statement, and promised him he wasn't alone. Back at the farm, I received a knock on my camper door. This time, it was official. A deputy from the county sheriff's department, friendly but clearly on duty. "Mr. Harmon, just a heads up. Cedar Grove HOA filed a civil suit against you this morning." Of course they did. They're claiming your land was incorporated by administrative motion in 2017, and you owe them for 8 years of non-compliance. Also says you're violating architectural standards by making unauthorized improvements. I stared at him. "There's no house." "Yeah," he said, scratching the back of his neck. I told them that. Judge's clerk thought it was absurd too, but the paperwork's filed. "You'll be served later this week." The deputy hesitated at the steps. "Off the record, sir. You're not the first. This HOA's been stretching its reach lately. You're just the first one who pushed back hard." I nodded. They picked the wrong guy this time. That night, Leanne and I put together a response package: motion to dismiss, motion for sanctions, and notice of pending criminal complaint. I printed and bound everything in triplicate, hand-delivered a set to the courthouse, and mailed another to Cedar Grove's fake little trailer. 2 hours later, as if summoned by ritual, another SUV pulled up to my front gate. This one didn't stop. It drove off after a slow pass, headlights off. I installed 2 more cameras before midnight. They wanted escalation. Let's escalate. 3 days after the lawsuit was filed against me, Leanne called with a tone in her voice I'd only heard once before, right before she got a state judge disbarred for backroom dealings with a developer. "They've been running a shadow program," she said. "It's not just you. Not just Holler. I've got at least 4 cases now. Elderly landowners, veterans, 2 widows, all within a 3 to 5 mile radius of Cedar Grove, all receiving similar invoices and threats. One even paid them $5,000 last year just to make them go away." My stomach turned. And the money. "Black hole," she said. "It never entered a proper HOA ledger. The payments were processed through something called CG Heritage Maintenance Fund, which isn't registered anywhere. I've initiated a private forensic audit. You're telling me they created an off-book account to extort rural landowners who were never part of the HOA? I'm telling you," she said, "we may be looking at organized fraud with a paper HOA as the front." I spent the next few days transforming my farm into Fort Harmon. More cameras, no trespassing signs, motion sensors, and trail cams on every side of the property. I even dug out my drone and started doing regular aerial sweeps just to monitor any vehicles near my fence line. If they wanted surveillance, they'd get it, just not the way they intended. Then came the envelope that nearly sent my blood cold. It arrived by courier. Not certified mail, not from a court, just a plain white envelope hand-delivered by a guy in khakis who muttered, "Just doing my job," before peeling off in a rental car. Inside were 2 new documents, each stamped with Cedar Grove HOA's embossed seal. One was a cease and desist notice, claiming I was conducting unapproved renovation activity on a heritage integrated parcel. The second was a notice of architectural violation that included an image of my barn under repair taken from a drone. The kicker? They'd attached a fine of $2,700. I didn't know what pissed me off more, the fake fine or the fact that someone had flown a drone over my land without permission. I brought it to Leanne immediately. She examined the documents and tapped the drone photo. "Where the hell did they get this?" she asked. "They're not even pretending anymore." We checked the drone's EXIF data. Embedded in the file were GPS coordinates taken from the airspace directly above my pond. "They're surveilling you," she said, "and fabricating violations based on it," I replied. "Which means they're committing another felony, unauthorized use of aerial surveillance for the purpose of false claims." We filed an immediate injunction to prevent further contact, but the judge required a hearing. Meanwhile, Leanne got in touch with a private CPA firm she'd used before to audit corrupt condo boards. They began digging through the HOA's records, banking history, and filings. What they found sent the whole thing into overdrive. 4 properties, mine included, had expansion inclusion forms dated from 2017 to 2020. All 4 had signatures from deceased owners. All 4 had pending balances over $10,000, and at least 3 had paid partial amounts under threat of litigation, and none of those signatures matched any legal filings with the county. Worse still, the names of 2 board members popped up as co-signers on those expansion forms, one of whom had a prior conviction in Texas for real estate wire fraud. We compiled a full dossier and submitted it to the county attorney general's office. By now, Karen Brady had gone quiet. No more SUV patrols, no more flyers, no more polite little death threats. But I could feel it. Something was building behind the silence. The next morning, the Tulsa County Gazette ran a front-page story. HOA accused of extortion scheme involving deceased landowners. Karen's name was right there in the subhead. By the time the article dropped, my phone was a war zone. Reporters, legal bloggers, even a local news station wanted to schedule interviews. I ignored most of them, but one call I took because it wasn't about headlines. It was from a man named Daniel Pittman, former county recorder. I read the piece. He said, "Thought you should know. I remember Cedar Grove trying to file a parcel expansion back in 2017. They brought in some sketchy paperwork and tried to backdate it. Didn't fly with our office. Got flagged and rejected. You're saying there's a formal rejection record?" There was. But you'll have to dig. They moved a bunch of files off-site in 2021. Budget cuts. Everything went into what we jokingly call the paper graveyard, a storage facility in an old school building out near East Garth. I borrowed Leanne's paralegal intern and we drove out that afternoon. The place was barely labeled, just a padlocked gymnasium stacked wall to wall with cardboard boxes. The clerk gave us gloves, a flashlight, and exactly 1 hour. We found it 45 minutes in. A faded manila folder labeled Cedar Grove Annexation Request. Inside, the full record of rejection. The county clerk at the time had handwritten a note. Not legally permissible, parcel not eligible. Missing owner consent. I nearly laughed. This was the origin point. The lie had a birth certificate. We scanned every page and backed it up twice. Back at the farm, the pressure ramped up again. A black truck, no tags, parked across the road for 2 nights in a row. I stepped out once with a flashlight, and it drove off without a sound. Another time, I found fresh boot prints near my western fence line. Karen's silence wasn't peace. It was strategy. Then came the subpoena. Cedar Grove's attorneys, some boutique firm out of Tulsa with too much leather and not enough ethics, filed a motion demanding access to my property for inspection and verification of non-compliant structures. I called Leanne. "They're trying to reverse the burden," she said. "Force a civil judge to rule your barn or house violates fake design codes, then say you're within their jurisdiction after all. It's like planting a flag on someone else's moon and claiming gravity." "Well," I said, "they're going to need a ladder and a spacesuit." We filed a counter-motion, including the county rejection, drone footage metadata, and sworn affidavits from both Holler and Pittman. The judge set a hearing date for preliminary review and warned Cedar Grove that any attempt to enforce rules on properties not explicitly recorded as HOA bound would be met with sanctions. But the real hammer came the following day. The audit team Leanne had hired dropped their preliminary findings. In a word, damning. 4 expansion parcels with fake consent forms. A 5th pending. 2 board members caught siphoning funds through shell companies tied to the so-called Heritage Maintenance Fund. Duplicate invoice numbers sent to multiple victims. One elderly woman had sold her car to pay an overdue assessment she didn't legally owe. I stared at the spreadsheet, feeling something between rage and awe. These people weren't just delusional, this was organized racketeering dressed up in HOA letterhead. And then, like a cherry on top, one of the board members flipped. Leanne got the call from her contact at the AG's office. A member named Brad Koenig had come in voluntarily and confessed, claimed he'd been pressured by Karen to rubber stamp every expansion filing since 2017, said he'd seen her forge at least one signature herself. They had him on record. Full deposition. It was only a matter of time now. It was the silence that told me she knew. For weeks, Karen Brady had ruled this twisted little empire from behind a podium of threats and bylaws. But ever since Koenig flipped, she'd vanished. No emails, no letters, no unmarked cars idling near my gates. Just absence. Like a rattlesnake that slipped under the floorboards. Leanne wasn't fooled. She's lawyering up. Probably shredding documents and rewriting history while she still can. I was preparing for the preliminary hearing when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. A gruff, tired voice on the other end said, "You Clay Harmon?" "Yes." "My name's Ellis Duran. My dad owned a parcel next to your land. He died in 2019. I just saw your story in the Gazette. I need to show you something. We met at a diner just off Route 44. He pulled a wrinkled folder from his backpack, set it on the table. Inside were 2 HOA letters from 2020, both claiming past due fees of over $9,000. One had a payment plan form attached, allegedly signed by his deceased father in 2021. My father couldn't sign this, Ellis said quietly. He'd been dead almost 2 years. My skin crawled. The signature matched the ones on my own so-called inclusion documents. I paid them, Ellis admitted. I thought it was real. They threatened to lien the property, said I'd lose it. I didn't have a lawyer. Just wanted to keep the land I got back to the farm and added Ellis's case to the binder. By now, it had grown into a small archive. Each page told the same story: fear, manipulation, deception. And behind every letterhead, Karen's name either signed or cited. The hearing came on a Wednesday morning, and the courtroom buzzed with reporters and murmurs. Cedar Grove showed up with a 3-person legal team in navy suits. Karen didn't appear. Her lawyer claimed she was under medical evaluation for stress-related complications. Leanne didn't flinch. "Let's proceed," she told the judge. We laid out everything: Koenig's deposition, drone metadata, forensic audits, archival rejections, Ellis's testimony. Leanne spoke like a surgeon, precise and cold. The judge sat still through it all, expression unreadable. Then he leaned forward. "I'm referring this to the district attorney's office for criminal review," he said flatly. "Pending that, I'm issuing a temporary injunction against Cedar Grove HOA and its board from initiating any further contact, claims, or actions toward Mr. Harmon or any landowners not officially included in the original HOA boundary map on file. As of 2011, gasps swept the room. Reporters bolted from benches. Cedar Grove's attorneys froze. Leanne smiled, barely. That night, I got a text from Holler. Check the news. Tulsa Today had aired the story under the headline, HOA House of Cards, Forgery, Fraud, and Fake Fees. A rural landowner fights back. They used drone footage from my own cameras, showed the barn, the pond, even the broken gate where I first met Karen's threats head on. The closing shot was me walking past the old oak tree near the front pasture, the one with a rusted horseshoe still nailed to it. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Because while the DA now had a file thicker than a phone book, I had something better. I had an idea. They came for her just after dawn. I was standing by the edge of the pond, boots in the wet grass, sipping my coffee when Leanne called. They served the warrant, she said. 5 counts: forgery, fraud, coercion, unauthorized enforcement, attempted extortion. She's in custody. I didn't say anything at first, just listened to the sounds of frogs in the reeds and the wind moving through the trees that had stood longer than Cedar Grove ever would. I thought you'd want to know, she added. The DA's also freezing the HOA's accounts, pending full dissolution. That was the word that hit hardest. Dissolution. Like acid poured on a paper map, wiping out fake boundaries and fictional authority. Cedar Grove. HOA, once the self-declared monarch of this stretch of Oklahoma soil, was now legally nothing. Less than nothing. A hollow husk with a poisoned name. And Karen Brady had gone from president to defendant overnight. A week later, I watched from the back of the courtroom as she stood in an orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, listening to a list of charges that read like a criminal resume. She looked smaller somehow, like all that puffed-up righteousness had deflated, leaving only bone and fabric. She didn't plead. Not that day. But her attorney asked the judge for bail. The judge didn't even blink. Denied. It wasn't personal. It was practical. She had already tampered with witnesses, doctored documents, harassed property owners, and ordered her so-called patrols to intimidate civilians. There was too much risk. Too many lies. Public reaction exploded. More victims came forward. Retired couples, single mothers, widowed farmers, all of them with stories. All of them with receipts, letters, or agreements they'd never actually signed. Tulsa Today ran a follow-up piece, "The Queen of HOA Fraud: How One Woman Held a County Hostage." And just like that, the dominoes fell. State investigators raided Cedar Grove's office, a rented suite in a strip mall behind a shuttered Dollar Tree. They walked out with 17 boxes of evidence. 2 board members were arrested for financial crimes. One had been embezzling funds for years, using HOA money to pay off credit card debt and book vacations under false maintenance budgets. The homeowner database, when unsealed, revealed even more horror. HOA dues charged to properties not in the association, liens filed without consent, and, worst of all, elderly homeowners coerced into settlements to avoid fake lawsuits. The county filed a motion to officially dissolve Cedar Grove HOA. The motion passed without contest, but the civil suits were just getting started. Leanne, in her sharpest navy blazer, filed a massive class action on behalf of over 24 victims. I was named as lead plaintiff. We didn't ask for vengeance, we asked for restitution, and we got it. 3 months later, after weeks of testimony, audits, depositions, and hard evidence, the court awarded $310,000 in damages to me, compensation for legal costs, emotional distress, harassment, and reputational harm. Several others received 6-figure judgments of their own. The judge ordered that any remaining HOA funds, assets, or owned properties be liquidated and paid out. Karen's own house, yes, the custom-built Craftsman with the ornamental fence and faux historic mailbox, was seized and listed for auction. Her name now appeared on a federal database of known HOA fraud offenders. Whatever future she imagined, it was gone. And me? I rebuilt. The farmhouse, once a decaying shell of memories and termite trails, now stood restored. The old barn was reinforced with reclaimed timber, its tin roof gleaming under the Oklahoma sun. I left the original 1911 stamp untouched, polished but unpainted, a reminder that truth doesn't need a fresh coat to survive. I planted wildflowers around the pond, restored the orchard with the help of a horticulturist from OSU, fenced the property line with cedar and steel, and added motion-triggered lights powered by solar. And then, just before fall, I opened the gates, not to an HOA, not to investors, but to students. With help from the University of Tulsa and a few historic preservation nonprofits, I turned the old barn into an education center, a place to teach landowners their rights, to host seminars on boundary law, easement abuse, and property defense. We called it the Free Soil Institute. People came from 3 counties over. Leanne gave the first lecture, HOA Overreach and the Power of Paper Trails. I gave the second, Why Dead Men Don't Sign Contracts. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. We even hung a sign on the barn carved from black walnut and bolted in place. It read, "No, this is not an HOA zone. This is free land, and it always will be." I still live there. Still walk the edge of the property every evening with a coffee or a beer in hand, depending on how the day went. Still nod to the oaks, the hawks, the wind that doesn't care about fences or rules or fake jurisdictions. Because land remembers. It remembers who tried to own it by force and who earned it by hand. And in the end, it always tells the truth.